This is podcast 1.2. Andrew, I guess you like it, so you're back for more, huh?
That's right. Always good to be back, Austin.
Well, last time we talked, it's almost a year ago. What's your favorite time of the year?
Austin, I'd have to say it's probably this time of year. Right after Halloween, and then you're getting ready for Thanksgiving, and then I will tell you though, I'm always a little sad when it's starting to wind down. So once we get past the New Year, then we don't really have any holidays for a few months. I'm always a little sad as we close out this week, but anywhere from October through Christmas is usually a good time for me. How about yourself?
Same. I kind of alluded to that when saying holidays in this time of the year, because it's not just a lot of holidays and you have times off. It's also the weather. It's cool. Like summer weather, humid, you just don't want to do anything. Or I mean, some people they want to get out during the summer and all, but like going outside to
Right.
walk when there's cool weather, it just refreshes the brain for me. And of course, like that's like the extra icing on top. The main thing is all the holidays. People are more happy generally, I think, around this time of the year. It's the Christmas spirit
Right.
or like holiday spirit. New Year's coming up. Do you have any New Year
Right.
resolutions?
I have a few personal projects that I'm working on, and I really need to get my butt in gear. One of them is setting up a hosting platform for my website. So I've been putting that off for months, and I haven't had a chance to do that yet. So I really have to work on that. I'm hoping I can finish that early January. I don't think it'll take too long, but I just have to set aside some time and really do it.
I see. So you have a New Year's resolution. What advice would you give to people who are like every year, it comes and goes. I try to make one, never fulfill it. No point in setting goals. You have a goal. What about those who don't want to or don't know how to set up a goal? What do you recommend to them?
You know, uh, I'd probably quote a lot of self-help coaches, and I'd say a goal with solid steps in place is a goal. A
Right.
goal that really have a plan is more of a dream. So for me, I have steps in place. It's just a matter of doing it. And I'll be honest with you, Austin, this is more of like my January resolution. I'm sure I'll have a February resolution. So
Mm.
um, New Year's resolutions, I'm always in favor of reinventing, of change. I think it's always a good way to develop yourself and your interests. Of course, if something's good, don't knock it, right?
Right.
So whatever works for you, I guess. Whatever works for everybody in your audience.
Gotcha. So we started this year, last podcast that we did, well, it was more like March. We talked about what's your outlook for the year. Now that we're at the end of the year, right? Usually we look forward with New Year's resolution, but it's also a chance to kind of reflect, right? What you said in the last podcast was, 2021, it was kind of like a continuation of 2020 with COVID and all that was happening. And so the outlook for 2022 is not so good. Probably continuation of COVID, right? We had the Omicron variant sometime then. And so we were thinking of maybe there's like Omicron 5.0 or something by the time this year. I mean, COVID's still around, right? And it didn't just go away,
Right.
but it wasn't like we're still in lockdown. So did this year turn out as bad as you think it was, or, were there any positive moments?
I'd say I was probably wrong about that, and not being a pathologist, and I think we know now that COVID, the initial strain is bad, and then as it mutates, as it evolves, it becomes more transmissible, but the effects are less severe. So
Mm,
it becomes more something that we can live with, and that's just I guess basic knowledge for anybody who studies pathology. I have not, so in the sense that the more virulent, the more deadly a virus is, the less chance that it will have to spread in the population because it will kill itself off. So, I think we did well there. We had the economy recovered, that was nice. And then we had the subsequent impacts of COVID, right? Supply
right.
chain constraints. So we have inflation, and then we have the interest rates, right? The Fed
Mm.
tries to compensate by raising interest rates. So that's really had a lot of damper on businesses, on spending, on wages.
So it's the
Everybody
indirect
feels
effects of COVID.
right, and not only that, but I forget, but I don't know if Russia invaded Ukraine this year or if it was last year.
No, it was
I
this
think it
year.
was this
Yeah.
year.
This year. Yeah.
Okay, right. So
February.
so that. well, very surprising. Are we in a better place, in terms of COVID? I would say so. Things have opened up gradually, but I think our world has definitely changed permanently. There's a lot of office workers, myself included. We may want to go back to the office, but nobody else does. Or we might
Mhm.
like working from home, but the fact of the matter is, remote work is here to stay. So everybody's home all the time, and it changes the way that we meet people. It changes the way that we interact with people. A lot of things are virtual now, where they didn't used to be before. That's here to stay. It's not going to change.
You think remote work's not going away, even though like people like Musk are going like, I got to get back in the office 40 hours a week. You got to be hardcore, things like that. That's not going to change.
Oh, that's personally, I think it's a very small subset of the population that's encouraging that. Even banking, they're trying to be more. There is some of that return to office with banking companies in New York City, but overall, even they're more lenient with their remote work policies. So, I definitely say that at least where I work, everything is virtual, and progressive employers, especially companies that have been around for a while, blue chip companies, tend to embrace this more progressive idea of work. So so far, I think we're seeing maybe some extreme viewpoints. Elon Musk and wants everybody to come back to the office, and Tesla and Twitter, but so far I don't think that's translated into the broader market.
Now, in tech work, it's easier to go remote because, I mean, the nature is you're sitting in front of a computer. The lucrative jobs people want are the remote work tech jobs, offer a lot of perks and all that, but even that changing a bit. Does that make the American worker less competitive though? Because things like manufacturing, you still got to go in and do it. Maybe like for Tesla, I don't know, if you're working on the AI for self-driving cars, you can do it from home. But for actually building the car, you need people to go there and work. And right now, those jobs are in China and maybe some other Southeast Asian country. Are there any drawbacks to remote work? Does it make us less competitive or less adaptable because we're just so used to being at home?
Yeah, I might respond to that question in a couple different ways. It's thinking about the different facets of the working population in America. Blue collar workers who have to be there on the factory floor installing things. Plumbers, electricians, construction workers. They all have to go to the site, to the job site to do the work, and that hasn't changed. That will never change. The other side of it, where white collar workers typically had to go to the office every day. Now they, have more time to do other things. And at least in my own experience, I don't know if this is holistic across the board, but at least my experience, when we are in the office and on our one day a month that we're in the office, everybody is much more focused. There's much more collaboration. There's a much better sense of togetherness and belonging amongst the office population. So, me personally, I think it does help to be in the office. Others would say that they're more competitive, right, by not being in the office because they now have time to pick up their kids after school, to step out, to do things here and there. And it's just less of a worry, less of a strain, less stress in their lives. So they have more time to devote to work. And working from home, as I'm sure many office workers will tell you, that working from home never ends. You're on at 5, sometimes 8 in the morning until 5 p.m. and then you're on maybe at 7 p.m. You check email again at 10 p.m. And you're always on. You're always on your phone or on your computer. There's the risk of burnout, but again, that contributes to more productivity. I will tell you that I've always been on my phone, on my laptop, almost 24/7 all the time ever since we began remote work. So, honestly, I'm having a hard time drawing some boundaries even for myself. So, pros and cons. I think it really depends by industry. So far, we've heard from different human resources practitioners that nowadays the yardstick is not by how many hours employees stay in the office or how many minutes they spend on a certain task. Now the yardstick is measured by whether business goals are being met, whether employees are meeting their goals for their job. And it doesn't matter how the work gets done or where it gets done or when it gets done. It's just that it gets done. Definitely changed a lot.
So one of the things you touched upon, and I want to make sure I got this right, you said on the day that people do come in, they're more productive, or is it that when people come in general, they're more productive?
You know, for me, I'd say the day of or those couple days a month that we come in, but definitely diminishing returns associated with that, right? When we come in on those couple days a month, typically we're very well rested on that first day and we get enough sleep. I remember before we went virtual, it seems a long time back now, right? And I think it's the story we'll be telling our kids one day that, I remember a time we had to come to the office 5 days a week, by the last day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I mean, I was tired and everybody was tired and you could tell. It's almost like you needed the weekend to recover. So pros and cons, I would say. But yeah, I would absolutely agree on the day or the couple days that we're in the office per month. It really is a different environment. Everybody is rushing to conference room. A lot of folks they're a lot more engaged. There's much more, I would say, ideas generally flow much faster. You can stop somebody in the hallway and talk to them about the project, and it doesn't have to be any kind of organized session. So definitely facilitates communication, definitely a better transmission of ideas. People are generally more constructive. So yeah, absolutely. I would agree.
One of the things that is not going online is school, right? So for high school, middle school, elementary school students, they still go to school in person, right? Teachers still have to go to work in person, right? And it's actually better that way because a lot of the stuff that happens in the classroom, the side conversations, the talk between the students gets lost, right? The whole classroom environment is lost. Is there something at work there that's also lost? And does it matter? Like in school, it does matter. I don't know. There was a New York Times article that just showed nationally our grades for like tests, especially math, I think, just plummeted during COVID and remote learning. And so is there some effect that at work that's just not being taken into account right now, or that you could see leading to a snowball effect of problems later on?
You bring up a good point, and I'm trying to guess why scores on tests and mathematics in particular might have gone down during COVID, during virtual learning.
Well, one of it is pretty obvious. It's like if you're on Zoom, right? Like us two right now, we're talking. We're both our videos on. We have to pay attention to each other. Otherwise, I don't know what to say next, right? You don't know what to say next either. But in a classroom, when you're with like 20 other people, most people don't have their video on. If it's a presentation, who's paying attention? You know what I mean? In a business setting too, it's like you have the option to not pay attention, even though it's out of politeness or integrity, you're supposed to be listening. But there's no way to enforce that or keep track of that. I mean, that's one of the reasons people do bad, and because they're not paying attention or you're not gaining much out of it. Now, if all there was to math is learning the formulas and practice, and you do pay attention, I wonder if that would actually help more. You know what I mean? It's like your teacher's constantly accessible, so you just have to pop on Zoom and ask them a question. So much easier than having to go into their room, and there's other kids nearby listening to what questions you have to ask, and you want to feel dumb, so you don't ask it. And there's none of that. It's just you and the teacher, right? So maybe that does help.
Right.
But generally, it did not show on standardized tests.
I think part of it is what you mentioned. Kids being there in the room, if they're in school, there's not too much else you can do. It's a captive audience, so to speak, right? Taking a Zoom call from your bedroom, I'm sure there are games, there are distractions, family distractions, pets, everything that comes into the picture and, makes learning less effective. But even more so, I'd say it's, especially during those formative years, middle school, high school, to me, I feel like it's very important to be able to make those relationships and form those relationships with fellow students. It's also a little bit of a herd mentality. You see your best friend who's very focused, right, taking classes seriously. Well, you're more likely to also be focused if you're sitting in the same room and you're able to talk and share tips and you're in the same environment, versus if you're only on Zoom, it's all virtual and I kind of drive my own car and everybody drives their own car and everybody there's no coordination, which I think just makes it more difficult. And it actually, probably gives rise to outsized perspectives, and different thoughts, not really conducive to a good learning environment. And, I'd say it's very similar to a corporate environment, where everybody is home. I'd say a lot gets lost in translation. My personal experience would be that it's very much about the job, and you have less time to get to know people. And the only way you get to know people is through doing something or doing some work. If I'm home all the time, I'm asking somebody about this project or that project. If they happen to mention something about their house or something about their kid, I will ask about it. But usually they don't, and you don't have time for water cooler conversations like that.
Mm-hmm. Are those important to the
Yeah,
workplace?
I would absolutely say so. We've, at least our team has made a conscious effort to set aside time every month, at least an hour every month, to establish like a water cooler session where it's not work related, and we have fun things, caption contests or holiday events. It helps, but it is certainly not a replacement for having that in-person, maybe one-on-one contact outside of a team setting.
Right. Now, you said that this is more important for kids in their formative years. Now, isn't
That's right.
work like in your 20s to 30s? Isn't that your formative years for working? Because you're trying to get promoted in a company, you're trying to climb the ranks. So in a way, you're starting out new too at a company. You don't know what's going on. But then it's like your whole life in school, you're in person, and then suddenly you get a job and it's done virtually. It's the kind of leaves people lost, I would imagine, in that it's like day in, day out in front of a computer. What more is there, I guess? Or what can I do more? Rather than you said the company needs to meet goals. As long as the goals are met, it's good. But then people, I think
Right.
some people, I don't know if this is, I don't even have stats on this, but some people would go what more can I do to show I want more than just being the same from year to year, right? I don't want to become replaceable.
So my experience has always been, typically for me, I don't mean to toot my own horn here, but
Uh-huh.
very much I always give 100%. I always work, a little above and beyond what I'm expected to do. So being at home it's very easy to get lost and to not have those boundaries. So for me, it's always been working on projects, and making sure I meet those deliverables ahead of time. Not just that, but doing above and beyond. So certainly as a young professional, trying to be promoted, trying to do a little more, trying to show my leadership that I can take on that extra people leadership role, right? Moving up in the corporate ranks. And I'm sure that there are development consultants and headhunters and folks out there that will be able to better advise. It's not always the best approach, just doing more work and spending more time and some they said sometimes leads to burnout, right? They would rather that I focus on maybe the most essential assignments and do those
Right.
well, and not spend as much time on the less important or less effective tasks. But I would say, it's not always clear, and just to share a story, for your viewers here on this podcast, recently I was up for promotion and I was unfortunately denied for that promotion. So, it's really a matter of questioning. Again, a lot gets lost in translation. I hear virtually from other people via email and Slack, that, it's great, and you do good work and we like you, but then at the end of the day, it turns out that you miss out on something and you're asking yourself why.
Now, do you think that in person it'd be different? Because virtually
Yeah,
things get lost in translation, but if in person, you think you would have had a better chance?
I think it would be more difficult. It's usually more difficult for someone to say no in person. Easier to have a conversation in person, to showcase some of the, and they're trying to do it over Zoom, but it's easier to say no to someone from behind a keyboard, from behind a screen. It's easier to kind of just let things be and step away, knowing that you're not going to see this person ever face to face. You probably won't have to talk to them ever. So there's this barrier that just makes it more difficult. Not to mention that I'm less able to. Maybe it's just for me, but so my company's headquarters are in Florida. I'm up here in Jersey, so for me to speak with someone there on site, it's like I have to travel or I have to
Yeah,
make
right.
specific time. That just might be something, my own situation. But definitely, I'd say it's ambiguous at best, right? To know if working harder will get you promoted, or what are the levers I need to pull? Who do I need to talk to get to that
Sure.
next level up?
Well, that's an age-old
Um,
problem even prior to COVID. Yeah. I guess my question is more because of COVID. Like before COVID, you kind of saw like work from home as like it was a rarity. It was like a perk. It wasn't commonplace, right? But COVID has accelerated it and made it something commonplace. And
right.
now we're trying to deal with it. It's like, is this something, well, you think it's here to stay? Is it something here to stay? Is it better? And then what are the drawbacks from it? I think that one of the things with remote work is that going back to the school example, there's no
Mm,
spontaneity with it. I think that's the big thing cut out from online stuff. There's no water cooler moments, right? There's no injection of certainty. And then Ethan listening to this might go like, oh man, coming from you, Austin, who loves everything to be structured, planned,
mhm.
nothing uncertain, right? But I come to realize if when you do have everything planned out or everything does go into plan, it's like it's not just things don't get worse, sure, but things also don't get better. You just kind of where you are always. And I don't know, like maybe some people they've had a rough life, like this is good, stability, it's great. But like I don't know, when you go through school, right? It's like you want to know more, you want better class, you want to do better, right? This idea of doing better.
Right.
It really like what can you do better if day in, day out? Your work is in front of a computer and that's it.
It works for some people. For others, it doesn't. I think as a young single professional, I am single, so any ladies out there, feel free to hit me up. But so for single professionals, I think it's harder to meet people. And it's
Mm,
harder to build connections, like we mentioned.
mm,
And some of those connections you definitely need to build. Not just for single folks, but also for people that are trying to move, right? For
right.
people that need to. And there are strategies around that. Set time. I've heard set time every week to network at least 15 minutes with somebody that you haven't spoken with. But
Mm,
it's just harder.
mm.
It has to be more deliberate, structured, like you mentioned.
Right.
Worked pretty well for some people. I mean, thinking about, and again, not married, not having kids, but somebody who does work maybe a 9 to 5 job, and
Mm,
it happens to be on the computer. They don't have to commute, and it's
mm,
9 to 5, and they don't have to do anything beyond that.
mm,
They have time to be with their kids and the family and the kids, and so maybe something else is their preference. So, it's easier that way. It's better that way, and, works for some people. Other folks, with different priorities, it might not work well for. So, but it's all a matter of adjusting. I think yes, COVID has changed the way we work, and that change is permanent. That will not go back. But how do we adjust? How do we adapt? How do I
mm,
make it work for me in my particular situation?
mm,
And in rare cases, somebody like myself, maybe it's just too much. Always being in front of a computer. I could do this indefinitely, like you mentioned, for years and years, and I could do it until I'm 55 and then retire without ever
mm,
leaving my house. You know,
mm, mm.
maybe I do need to shake things up, and I do need to go somewhere else. Maybe like a job that does have to be face to
Mm.
face. So that's different options.
Right. I'm just still inwardly laughing at deliberately scheduling in spontaneity. You know, it's like deliberately scheduling a time to just be natural. Right. It's almost like a contradiction in a way. It's like spontaneity, you can't plan it or you can't schedule it. But then
Yeah,
you have to
yeah,
schedule that. You have to schedule it in. Let's be spontaneous for these next 15 minutes.
that's
You
right.
know what I mean? It's like it's so many contradictions in our world right now. I wonder if we talked
Right.
about last time your car project. I don't think we did. You want to talk a little about that? That was a
Sure,
long time ago
definitely. So
project, right?
yeah, several years ago, and those skills are still transferable today. So I still rely on
Hmm.
those every now and then. But for me, outside of work, I work on cars. I drive a Toyota Corolla, so it's things break rarely. Very few and far between do I ever have any issues with it. But when something does happen, I'm pretty familiar with how an internal combustion engine car works.
Mm.
Brakes and fuel line and alternators and the engine, transmissions and that type of thing. So, I do that, but again, sticking with the computer theme and I never really categorized myself as an introvert or extrovert. I don't really know where I fall on the scale, but I've been doing a lot of, I guess what you could call introvert activities, trying to learn programming, building websites, learning a lot about, coincidentally, what I do for work. So, it's not, I'd say it's very coincidental. I started off as an app developer, developing apps on the iPhone, and then I moved on to building websites because
Mm.
websites are more accessible and they're free
Mm.
and they're not tied to any specific app store or ecosystem or language.
Mm.
Anybody can access any web page from anywhere without needing to install an app. So that's been something that I've worked on and like my own private, thing that I've been doing, which happens to be coincidentally related to what I do for work.
Gotcha. That's your inner mechanical engineer coming out, I think, right? It's like cars, app developing, things you might not get to do at work, you kind of like get to play with around at home. Would you say that's kind of how it is?
Definitely, and it really depends on what each person's interests are. For me, it happens to be programming and building things. Other folks might like to travel or take vacations or
Yeah.
kids, right? So
Yeah. Go to an
um,
opera.
yeah,
Not opera anymore. What is it? Broadway? Yeah, watch a show. Are people into operas? You
definitely.
know anyone? It's like, oh, I'm going to the opera. No, it's usually like Broadway, right? Or something like that. I don't know. I live under a rock, so.
Yeah, I don't know. Right. I have a friend who's actually an actress in the Met Opera, but
Oh, wow.
I don't. I mean, well, maybe say I know of someone who works there, but
Mm. Don't know what they're
no, I
interested in or like what they would do
don't
on like a
know.
night out.
Right. I don't know who the regular clientele, would be at the Met Opera. Maybe somebody, I don't know. Just
Yeah,
speculate. Upper class workers. I don't know.
sure. Yeah, I don't
But
know. I don't know. Right. This is stuff I don't know. Yeah.
right.
Well, something we talked about last time on our podcast, I guess this is one of your, I don't know if it's a hobby, is crypto. And then one thing you said is crypto, it's up one day, down the next. It's not doing so
Right.
hot. And this is
Right.
February. This is before Sam Bankman-Fried. This is before the FTX collapse. And Andrew said it was not doing so hot. So he already saw something, I think, going on with the industry. Any opinions on what happened recently or like Sam Bankman-Fried? The collapse of FTX. Does that shake your faith in crypto?
I'll be honest. I had thought about buying a Bitcoin when it was back at 44,000, probably last year or the year before. So, glad I didn't do that. But I had people who had lost, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Oh
I've heard
no.
stories people who lost dollars from doing that.
Mm,
So I count myself fortunate. But, I think it's the lack of regulation for that industry
mm,
is what makes it dangerous because it's new, it's not very well regulated, and we're finding out, that even folks like Sam Bankman-Fried, who appear to be, titans of the crypto industry, they, are, CEOs worth billions and billions of dollars, or were worth billions of dollars at one point. Even they're susceptible to the lack of regulation, and it might be partially of their own doing.
mm,
Certainly, Sam Bankman-Fried, he, for folks who are not familiar, he moved customer funds from FTX to Alameda Research, his other company, and he took out loans against customer money. Not only that, but his funds were over leveraged in his FTT token. So most of his funds were not cash. They were in they were listed against a token. So they were all in a certain token currency. So when that token currency went south, pretty much the whole thing unraveled. The valuation of both companies plummets, filing for bankruptcy, allegations of fraud. You're not able to cover those losses. So, certainly now, with banks that have been around forever, you hear about regulations for keeping a certain amount of cash on hand, right? Stress tests, diversification of portfolios, and that's mandated throughout the industry. I mean, unbelievable regulation for banks. The Sam Bankman-Fried's company FTX, managing billions and billions of dollars worth of customer funds
using QuickBooks.
Very hard to imagine that they would not benefit from the same regulation.
So actually, you keep talking about regulation, and that's actually one of the controversial things, right? It's like do we need more regulation, right? For crypto, it's a new industry, so it doesn't have a lot of regulation. But does regulation make things better? For like a laissez-faire economist who like government hands off, it makes business better, like less regulation, people can just pursue what they want, don't have to care about taxes, or this rule, that rule. Otherwise, in a environment where there's too much regulation, only the big businesses can thrive because they can hire people to kind of like take care of the regulations for them. If you're like a mom and dad pop shop, you're going to get killed by regulation. So is regulations the answer then? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, and I say it really comes down to intention, right? The regulation is intended to keep everybody honest. So if you have, bad actors, who are, again, I don't want to defame anyone or to say anyone is bad, but there are allegations of fraud against Sam Bankman-Fried here. So it's a matter of, we're seeing some improprieties in the market where customer funds are being moved, or people are, companies are borrowing against customer funds. Those funds are supposed to be, available for customers. They're supposed to be guaranteed to a certain degree.
Right.
They have to do good by their customers. So, if you're borrowing, you're playing around with somebody else's money, and then you end up not being able to meet that obligation at some point, that looks really bad.
Right.
And damaging. It's not just affecting that company. Not only does that company go bankrupt, but you're talking about billions of dollars that were actually other people's money. That everybody's affected. So, that's, I would say, if somebody did the right thing, and they diversified the assets and they, made sure to take all the proper precautions, then, maybe that would preclude the need for regulation. But at least in this case, without having regulation, you end up with somebody, with potential abuses.
Right.
And that leads.
But even when there's a lot of regulation, like you use banks as one of the most regulated industries ever, and they're regulated, I think, because of the Great Depression, right? Like there was bank runs, and then people couldn't get their money during the Great Depression, so then the government stepped in. But then even when the government stepped in, they didn't see someone like Bernie Madoff come along, and just defraud people that way. And it's like he did it right in the nose of the Security Exchange Commission, the SEC. He was friends with the people there. So then, like, regulation's supposed to catch these kind of bad actors, but they weren't able to catch the biggest one of all, So like, even if we do have more regulations, how do we ensure we catch the bad actors? And like, because there's kind of two sides to it. We want to catch the bad actors, but we also don't want to kill business because there's too much regulation. How do we get a healthy balance of the two? This might be a little out of both our depth, but like, yeah.
Right. I think part of it is, for me, working in fraud strategy, it's a question we get a lot, all the time, right? If we put in a particular control that's intended to catch a certain situation, right, and then something else comes along that we weren't aware of, right, then we put it's almost like this reactionary control, which unfortunately, a lot of regulation happens that way. Not to say that we don't have great minds in Washington that, try to ensure, through provisioning enough capital or doing stress tests on banks, right? That things will not happen again, right? So,
Mm,
I'd say to a certain degree, does it stop business? Does it prevent business from maybe making as much money as they could? Could they make more money with less regulation? I'm sure they could, but maybe acting in the interests of certainly if it's a private lender or something that's not FDIC insured,
mm,
or if it's a private company, they're free to use their finances however they see fit, right?
right.
But anytime that it's customer funds, or it has, the potential to be like a public issue, that's where maybe it happens. It's like if you don't want regulation, then you can run it as a private company and nobody will bother you, right? But as soon as you want access to investor capital, well, now you have this, that, and the other regulation that you have to follow.
Gotcha. I'm kind of more radical than you, Andrew. You're kind of like a good guy in this case. Let's follow the rules of society, so that's good. I feel that sometimes you need a bad event to discover who's faking it. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's this huge fraud case, and then you finally realize, oh crap, like we don't have this covered, right? Like I like this
Right,
quote by Warren Buffett. You only find out who is swimming naked when the tide goes out, right? It's like when things are,
right,
and that's true because like we caught Bernie Madoff during 2008 when things were going south, right? People want their money back,
right,
and then they suddenly realize this whole thing is a Ponzi scheme. But with Sam
right,
Beckman-Fried, they're realizing now when the economy is not doing so well, crypto's going down, people want their money back. When people want their
right,
money back, they finally discover this. So then is the best
right.
way of discovering this type of fraud just like free market then? Let the market force regulate and catch these bad actors rather than any type of government oversight or intervention.
That's a tough question to answer. Certainly there are proponents for either side of the
Right.
equation, but I'd say that the government has a duty at least of doing some
Mm,
preventive, and even that, it's difficult. It might be challenged in court, right? Without any particular loss, right, or without any particular event, they're trying to draft legislation to head off some potential outcome that hasn't materialized. So
right.
that might be legally questionable, but I think it just helps to guard against, and unfortunately, it's like in this case where these CEOs, at least Sam Bankman-Fried, we hear about. Honestly, it's like he kind of lost touch with reality, at least in my
Mm,
perspective, like living in penthouses, worth tens of millions of dollars, spending a ton of money on different perks, and at that point, if you're living such a high lifestyle, you're kind of very far abstracted from what's going on the ground and who your customers are and how to serve those customers, how to best serve those customers, right? So
right.
at that, you kind of, it becomes a numbers game. You're just like, you know, I don't see my customers. They're kind of out of the picture. I can do whatever I want with their money. That's not right. So,
Right.
not that regulation will fix the problem 100%, but it may help.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of money and government, Ukrainian aid. Last time we did the podcast, we talked about Ukraine, possible scenarios that could play out. One of the scenarios we said was stalemate, but we did basically cover all the scenarios. We said like Ukraine would fall like Afghanistan, like super fast, Taliban comes in, the
Right.
government falls. That didn't happen. And we kind of saw it wasn't happening early on when we last talked about it. And the Ukrainians are fighting on. The other thing was it would escalate
Right.
into World War III. We've been
Right.
close, but that hasn't happened yet, right? And the third
Right.
scenario was stalemate, and that's kind of where we are now. And so Biden's position on it is, as long as it takes, we're going to help Ukraine out as long as it takes. That's the repeated
Right.
quote he gives, right? The kind of the rally around the flag quote that they do.
Right.
But you and I were talking a bit about this, right? It's like let's do a cost benefit analysis. It depends how we're giving the aid and what aid we're giving, right? So you want to give
Right.
your power station example?
Right. Yeah. And I'd say this. So and again, maybe not to discount, the importance of giving aid to Ukraine,
Right, right.
but maybe just thinking of how we can do it more effectively. The example was a Patriot missile. A single Patriot missile costs about $3 million US,
Right.
and damage to a power station or substation might be far less than that. So intercepting a cruise missile to prevent damage to a particular, power station, I'm just questioning, if there's a better way. We hear about the Iron Dome, or we hear about, new emerging technologies that can intercept cruise missiles or rockets. Truly, it comes down to cost-benefit analysis, and we were saying that if both sides are equally capitalized, which it looks like, almost at this point, with the U.S. supporting Ukraine and then Russia having their oil revenues, they're able to procure missiles and ordnance from other countries. It's indefinite, right? One side needs the oil, and then the other side, buys weapons from other countries. So it's this cycle, and then it's like, who can outspend the other? Or you hear about Russia using drones that are very cheap, right, to overwhelm expensive Ukrainian anti-air defenses. It's like this dollars game, and to a certain degree, maybe Russia has to do that. And maybe it begs the bigger question is, like, where do we go from here? If Russia, it's like there's endless aid, that's going to Ukraine, and again, pros and cons and different sides, to the argument is whether or not we should just make it an endless blank check to Ukraine, or if it's based on some limitations, we have some better governance around the money that's being sent. But in time, it's like, yes, we're helping Ukraine, but
How are we
where
doing
does Russia go from? Yeah, assuming Russia takes Ukraine, right? Where do they go from here? Or how do they? It's like, what do we gain from buttressing Ukraine against Russia? And maybe you can help me out with some of the history here.
Well, Ukraine, since the fall of the Soviet Union, was an independent country. And so I think the big part of US stepping in is that you just invaded a sovereign country, right? You can't do that in our world today. It's a big deal, right?
Right.
It's especially if
Right.
since Ukraine's a democracy. Now, does Ukraine have a history of corruption? It used to be very corrupt. I don't know if it still is, right? But it was it was it was notoriously corrupt, the Ukrainian political system.
Right.
I mean, Zelensky got voted in, I think, because he vowed to fight against this corruption. Now, how successful he is, I'm not quite sure, right? Because I'll need to look more into it. I'm sure a lot of professors, they study just this aspect, of Ukraine culture, cultural identity, political, social, economics, all that stuff. So our support, I guess nominally it's because Ukraine's a democracy. Now, is it to weaken
Right.
Russia? Putin kind of likes to see it that way, right? It's like NATO ganging up on Russia, wants to keep Russia weak, But so far, like, we provided aid to Ukraine, and Ukraine's still asking for more, right? Ukraine wants tanks, it wants fighter jets, and we
Right.
haven't provided them to
Right.
Ukraine, right? Because we don't want to escalate, and we've been hesitant. Like, we recently just gave Ukraine the Patriot missile. Like, we were really hesitant to give that to them. Because if they use
Right.
that and then target like somewhere in Russia, then that just brings the war closer between U.S. and Russia. Because Russia could say, "This is your weapons." They wouldn't have this capability if you didn't provide it to them, right? And so
That's right.
we were kind of trying to provide weapons that are just for defense. Now, I think recently Ukraine hit a military base. Now, it never publicly says it did it, right? But then there's Russian targets being struck deep within Russia by
Right.
someone, right? And who else has the capability, right? Is this some domestic terrorist? I mean, I don't think so, but like we do see Ukraine has an ability to strike in Russia now. But even Ukraine, like it's once it kicked Russia out from Ukraine, it didn't keep going into Russia. So I think that says something about the nature of the war, right? Russia says it's trying to get rid of a Nazi regime or something in Ukraine, right? Or in like it's fighting against the West, things like that. But like we don't have American troops in Ukraine. Russia has Russian troops in Ukraine, right? So and then when Ukraine does fight Russia, it never steps onto Russian land. I mean, not Russia might say we
Right.
annexed certain territory, and now so you are on Russian land. But I personally don't consider. I think that's kind of like that's almost like Ukraine claiming parts of Russia and going like, oh no, this isn't Russian land, this is Ukrainian land. So like two can play that game, but only one's playing that game right now. It's Russia. So like faulty reasoning, I feel. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I think we talked about setting a precedent, right? If we let
Mm.
Putin get away with this, right? The U.S. lets Putin get away with this, then it's setting precedent that it sends the wrong message, right, about imperialism and colonialism in today's era of the
Mm.
UN, right?
Right.
And the Geneva Convention, not being able, so abiding by those rules. But on the other hand, is it also that we're trying to prevent Putin from rebuilding the USSR? I mean, do you think that it's possible that Putin could rebuild the USSR, if maybe
Mm.
given enough time and resources to do that?
Well, I don't think Putin wants to rebuild the USSR. I think he wants to rebuild Russia. And the key difference is the USSR is like a communist regime, right? Eventually its goal was to like communize the whole world. For Putin, it's more just Russia and the former Soviet Union, right? Because Ukraine used to be part of the Soviet Union and all. I think that he has a very nationalist agenda. It's to make Russia great, right? To be like one of the great czars. Because if you think about it, for the past 200 years, if we go back to World War II, when Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, and then go back 100 years before that when Napoleon invaded Russia, right? Russia was always getting invaded, right? And so it has this long history of fear of external invasion. If you suffered two major invasions in the past 200 years, like you have a reasonable fear it might happen again. When Putin says like NATO should no longer expand and should not include Ukraine, like that's a red line on the negotiating table. He's not saying it because he's crazy, right? There's some historical justifications for him saying that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it depends because we live in the US. And so are we biased in thinking that, US and Europe would never invade Russia, right? Are we biased in thinking that way? Or is it the truth that because we live in this pacifist and multicultural, or we don't have any like nationalist government wanting to go into Russia anymore, like is that all in the past? Or does Russia have a reasonable fear? And I think this is where it depends where you view it from. Like as Americans, I don't think we'll want to attack Russia. We have no appetite for war.
Yeah, it makes sense, but it's also this indirect. I think we talked before about Indonesia. I think wanting to purchase fighter jets from Russia, and instead we pressured them into purchasing fighter jets from the U.S. So, or we threatened to hold some aid unless they purchase, jets from us instead. So it's like there is always this competition, right? And certainly even before Russia invaded, there's always cyber attacks that we hear about, right? This like shadow war, where it just stops short of being a war, right? But there's still a lot of friction. So
Right.
I would agree with that. I think it's it definitely depends on, like you mentioned, from your perspective.
Now saying that again, like you said, we're all smiles and all that, but still, like for those fighting in the war, it's a cruel reality to them, right? It's like
It is.
people are dying over this, and it's kind of it brings a lot of hatred, sadness, anguish, very very painful emotions. But one of the things you talk about with the cost benefit analysis with the aid we provide. Now, I'm not saying we don't provide any aid. That's not my intention. But it's like you said,
Right.
if a power station gets hit and it costs thousands of dollars in damage, right? Should we just give thousands of dollars in rebuilding it? Or should we provide, like you said, the Patriot missile, which is what, you said 3 million?
$3 to $4 million per missile.
3 million, and we intercept like $1,000 missile. Because if we do that, we just lost maybe 2.9 million in U.S. taxpayer dollars, right? Now, is that worth it
That's
in saving Ukrainian life? Like, that might be how the Ukrainians portray it. It's like if you can intercept a missile and save Ukrainian life, isn't a life worth more than certain $1 million? I mean, you can't say no to that, right? And that gets into the gray area thing. But certainly, it's like
right.
I had this thought too when Obama started shooting missiles at ISIS in Syria, right? We don't want boots on the ground, right? But we'll willingly deploy drones and take out targets. Like recently, ever since World War II, I think the U.S. has always depended on technology to fight its wars, not manpower, always like a technological place to save American lives. If you could use fewer soldiers and save lives using technology, why not do so? That's the American mentality to fighting wars, right? But it does beg the
Yeah.
question. It's like if we're using $1 million missiles to blow up a truck, like an ISIS truck, right, carrying ammunition that's worth altogether like $10,000, like aren't we losing money? Isn't that a economic win for the people we're trying to destroy? Right. I have thought of that question. It's like a mathematical way of fighting war. You said like we all start out with the same capital. It's almost like a board game. It's like each start with $5,000. All right, who's gonna be bankrupt first? Whoever becomes bankrupt first loses the game. Right. Of course, it's not just down to the variable of money, but it does beg the question. At this rate, will we run out of money faster than Russia? I don't know because like I don't have all the data in front of me. I'm not an analyst in the government. If they give me a job though, I might. That would be very interesting to look at.
And I'd say, yeah, I mean, and Putin kind of has, his argument is right in the sense that it's half the world against Russia, right? It's Europe, right, as well
Mm.
as, well, Turkey here and there, but the East, and then U.S., right? So it's not just the U.S., but it's the Western world against Russia in this conflict. Will one side, honestly, I think Russia's on the losing side here, but who's to say? If they have enough drones or they have enough low cost munitions that end up depleting more expensive air defenses.
Right.
That's always a consideration, right? Money is not unlimited, but at the same time, you're talking about the entire Western world essentially. So
Right.
maybe it is unlimited.
So one of the things like historically of interest is the Russian Revolution that occurred in the midst of World War One, 1917, right? It's not that Russia ran out of money and lost World War One. It's that its own government, the Tsar, got overthrown in the midst of fighting World War One, and then the communists took over, and then they wanted out on the war. And so will something similar like that happen to like Putin, right? Where like the Russian people become so discontent with what's happening that they want a regime change, right? I think Biden said something about that, but then his administration quickly walked back on it. It's like we don't want regime change in Russia because it is dangerous to call for regime change, especially for another
Right.
country that's sitting in the UN Security Council, right?
Right.
It would, even if Russia's not making the right move right now, and like Ukraine labels it a terrorist state, it's still like it would still be very destabilizing if Russia did not have a central government. Like I think one of the things that gets
Right.
neglected is what's happening in Azerbaijan right now. I think they recently conflict is starting to flare up because Russia used to be the security force there. Now that it's diverted its troops to Ukraine, there's no security presence there to keep hostile neighbors from fighting each other. I don't think
Yeah.
the regime change is not the answer, but the way to end the war is not just through money means alone. It could be through, again, a lot of different factors.
That's good context. I think that helps our the audience here understand that I at least I was not aware that the Russian Revolution happened in the middle of World War One. So
Maybe you were
definitely,
aware of it
and
at
I
some point, but then
sure.
the drudgeries of life came along, and then who cares,
Uh, but yeah, I think at least I can see why Biden's administration wanted to walk back that statement that Biden was calling for regime change because it's more of as reprehensible as some of Putin's actions may be, it's also the devil, right? Somebody who's been studied meticulously over the years, right? How they will act in a certain situation, right? There's some structure and stability to their government, at least,
Right.
versus something comes in, that's unpredictable, and then now they have access to nuclear arsenals, and they're able to, that's far more explosive potentially than keeping everything under Putin. So it's a lose-lose. I agree with you. I think it's a lose-lose situation. There's no right answer there.
Right. And for those of you who want to be more technical, technically what Biden said was cannot remain in power. Now, whether that translates into regime change or not, or he's just angry, I think Biden tends to say a lot of things and then make a lot of gaps, and it makes me take him less seriously. But I could totally see like Russia or some right wing news commentary. They just jump on this and go, Biden's advocating for regime change and all that. I mean, he's
Right,
pissed
right,
at what's
right.
happening, but should he be more careful with what he says? Yeah, but yeah, just like our last president, like they seem to keep saying whatever they want. Yeah.
Sometimes it's trying to come through unfiltered, and be the everyman, that Americans need to hear,
Yes.
but at the same time,
Right.
you know, difficult to balance because he is such a world leader. He's a leader on the world stage, interfacing with other world leaders. His word gets spread across the globe, so it's
Right,
like,
exactly. I'm glad I'm
yeah,
not
it's
in
a
that
difficult place.
position. But
Yeah.
speaking of words getting spread everywhere, this podcast, technically anyone can view it across the world, and maybe one day what we say will come back to bite us. Someone will go, Austin, how could you say that? How could you question Ukrainian aid? If you're questioning
Mhm.
Ukrainian aid, you're with Russia. I'm just waiting for that day that someone outrages at that. Or like
I don't,
how dare
I don't
you
think it's wrong to.
criticize?
I don't think it's a question or to see how we could do it more effectively. Um, so I think that's fine. But
I think so too,
maybe
but people
someday.
can people can spin it, right? People will spin it, and they'll just take a 3-second clip out of this and go like, "Oh, he criticized President Biden," Like, I guess I criticized President Biden, but it's not like, oh man, President Biden's a bad president, Like I'm just, like what he did say,
Oh,
this
very
president cannot remain in
good.
power. What do you want to take from it, Like, I mean.
All right.
I'm not
Uh,
saying like I'm not driving the point home like this like he said that he's advocating for regime change. That's the end of it. Like I think it's some right wing news media they might go like that. Or now the right wing news media might attack me and go like, well, Austin, why are you spinning this? He did say it. Why are you trying to make it seem like it's not a big deal? If Trump said that, would you be okay with it? It's almost like if no matter what I do, I'm always in the wrong, right? And so I think that's why most people don't do podcasts. But because like no matter what you say, it's like someone's gonna take offense to it, or it's
right.
like it's always gonna be wrong. But what do you think, Andrew? You came on this podcast, right? So you either had nothing to be afraid of, or you haven't weighed the odds and
You
just
know,
haven't thought about it.
for me, I'm thinking about it from the perspective of folks who have been on the podcast, other than myself,
Mhm.
and asked for their particular podcast to be taken down. Thinking from their perspective, I think you told me it's around five, so five out of the 23, now the 24th, including this one that you've done. Um, that's all. That's more than 20%. All right, so that's a considerable number. And just thinking about that demographic, and I've seen some of the other guests on your podcast, mostly younger, like middle class professionals, people maybe just getting started in their career or finishing up
Right.
school, right? I'd say they have a lot of intelligent viewpoints to share, on a variety of subjects. They
Right.
watch the news, they're well, so maybe the question that I'd have for you is, it seems like it's almost like self-censorship. Like we're losing their insights. They have
Mm.
something to share, they share it, but then they're not comfortable for it to be shared at a broader level. And I'll give you my answers to this later. But what do you think it takes for someone to be comfortable in their own perspective?
That's a tough question because what it takes for someone to be comfortable depends on the person. Because if you have an introverted person, it's very hard for them to say anything, like let alone like just say it to you like one on one. To say it to the whole world, well, that's a big deal for them. So for them to come on, I think it is a big deal. They probably considered it, and maybe they've had second thoughts, or they've realized like they've thought about what they said, and then they realize like they've thought about what could be twisted out of context, and then they don't want it on anymore. For those more extroverted people, I think Extroverted people tend to say a lot of things. They might not think through what they say, right? And so that's
Mhm.
the big problem. But then, so once they say it, they might want to take it back. Now, some people, like you said, you don't categorize yourself as just introverted or extroverted. It depends on which crowd you're with. But I've heard, like, I think Dean drove this point home the best. We were talking about having a private conversation on a podcast, and he said as soon as you click the record button, the conversation is no longer private, because once you record, it could be to the whole world, right? It's no longer just between me and
That,
Andrew. Like someone's listening
right.
right now. And so
That's right.
for those who've gone on podcasts, or for those who've done recordings, they know that they have that sense, and they're careful. But for those who've never done it before, I guess once they do it, it's not kind of sets into them, and they realize like, oh, it's not just between me and us. Someone else might be listening, and that they might not be ready for it, and so I'm okay with it.
No, that's a good point. I think it's part of that legal thing that you mentioned, that once you hit record, there's no expectation of privacy, right? So anybody can cut a soundbite from it. It's there, it's online. Once it's online, that's it. It lives on a server, and that server is replicated 100 different times.
Yeah,
And
yeah, right,
you can't you can't delete it. You want to delete, if you delete it, it's 99 other copies.
right. The other thing is that it's our culture today, right? We're very divided, American society. Everyone takes, well, no, I shouldn't say everyone. The views that you do hear are the extremes, really. It's like the most hardcore you can be. You're either hardcore right or hardcore left. You rarely hear from the people in between. Because people see normal as boring, kind of. If you have a normal view, like, who cares? I want to know, like, the most extreme views, right? That's what gets attention in the news,
It's headline.
right? The
That's right.
headlines, right, right. And so then you get more polarized that way. I mean, do I think that everything I say on this podcast is right? No, I don't think that. And actually I'm open to changing it. Like, I think one of the most controversial things I said was with Ethan when I talked about marriage. Like, currently, I see marriage as between man and woman. Wow, in today's world, that's really controversial, right? It's like, why do you say that? So do you not see marriage between man and man as marriage, or things like that, right? And so, I mean, I might get canceled for that. But like, I mean,
Right.
if you talk it out with me, I might be open to change. Like, honestly, like right now, it's like, I guess one of the questions I get asked for people who just see heterosexual marriages as marriage, right? They ask, so if your friend who's gay gets married, would you go to their wedding, right? Because then by going, I guess that means that you indirectly acknowledge that that is a marriage. I mean, I'm
Right.
not going to go out and
Right.
go protest, hold like picket signs and go like, this is marriage or things like that, right? Especially if it's a friend. But
Right.
personally, like, I just don't see it that way. I mean, and that might
Mm-hmm.
be controversial, and it is in today's world. But then, like, can I just not hold that opinion to myself?
Well, here's the thing, and I'll say this. I think it's um, not just nobody can predict what happens 50 years, 100 years down the road, right? What
Right.
was right back in the 50s, even with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right,
Uh huh.
where he was talking about mechanics being men and women staying largely in the house,
Uh huh.
right?
Right.
Even that is not, here we are, 70 years later, 60, 70 years later, that's changed a lot,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Now for
Right.
him to say that, believable. And if he wasn't such a nice guy, Mr. Rogers, and people didn't associate him with this kindly father figure, he might very well have been canceled. Um,
Oh no, he not.
you
It's
know,
not might very well might have been. He would have been canceled straight off. Yeah.
who's to say? Everything that we say here is more in the here and now, and we'll have to rely on the mercy of future generations, to understand that what we're saying, applies maybe just to today's environment and our perspectives given what we know, and what's socially acceptable.
Like, one of the things with marriage is like, I'm a kind of actually very kind of shaky right now. It might just be my upbringing that I hold the view that marriage is between man and woman. You know, it's like, because
Mm-hmm.
it's very hard to justify this sort of thing. It's like, well, so why is it between man and woman? Like, it's almost like if I have to take this ground, I gotta justify it. And I don't want to take like a religious tone to it. It's like, because the Bible says so, right? Because that brings like a religious tone to it, and that gets messy. Because then it's like, oh, that you're going against my religion, and that then it's like, how do you justify it outside of religious cultural grounds? And honestly, I haven't found something good to justify it. But then it's like, if I don't justify it, so then people would go like, so then you do accept gay marriage, or like you do accept marriage between anyone, like love is love. I can't accept that either. I don't think like love is love. Like you could justify incest that way. Love is love. If a brother likes their sister and they have kids, I mean, genetically there becomes problems with that. Like I think societal wise, still a majority of people think there's something wrong with that. It's not and I'm not like trying to compare homosexuals to incest, right? Like I'm just saying like I'm kind of lost myself too. I don't have a very solid view. I'm still trying to figure it out. So there you go.
Right.
I tell you, someone's gonna take a
Yeah.
3-second clip of that, and I'm gonna get in so much trouble. But there you go.
That's a very difficult question, and personally, my own viewpoints on the subject, I try not to think about it too much. I'm more of like a laissez-faire type of person. Whatever works for them doesn't affect me. I'm good.
And I think most people are like
But
that.
yeah,
If it works for you, it works for you, right?
yeah, I know there's some very strong opinions on the subject. I'm not trying to downplay anything.
And it's
I
hard to
don't
take a
feel
position on it because you end up offending people because it's so close to them. Like marriage is very central to a person's identity, right? And it's very close. And so when you start talking about things not abstract that have implications, real life implications, that gets to people. Because by me saying, I see marriage as between men and women, then it's like, oh, so then what about me then? If you were put in this situation where you had to recognize same-sex marriage, then would you not do it then, Austin? Right? Then I become a hater of like gay people, right? Then I mean, but do I hate people because of that? I don't hate people, but like I guess that's like I don't know what the ground is on this.
well, and here's the thing. I mean, I would say I don't think there's anything wrong with being your authentic self. We talked about this before, but
Mm,
it's like it really, it comes down to a matter of opinion. Certainly the law is the law, and there are proponents for law, on either side, right? Certainly, so same-sex marriage was arrived at through a lawsuit, right? And you
mm,
had a prosecutor, had a defense, so you kind of had both sides of it. So there are supporters on both sides, and Austin, honestly, I know a lot of great people that think that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's it. I know a lot of great people who don't think that way. So to me, it's like, that fact alone, I'd even say to folks that are asking you these pointed questions, that fact alone shouldn't decide whether or not they're friends with you or whether they speak to you or whether, it really shouldn't. It's
mm.
like, it's almost like, we're talking about your cancel culture. It's like somebody said one thing and they hold this position on this subject. It doesn't mean that, they call it the, not the halo effect, but the opposite of it. Essentially, if somebody's really bad or if you dislike one thing about somebody, then you dislike the whole person. That's not constructive either. So, it's like,
But that's what's going on in our culture, and I think that's why people are afraid to come on, because they say one wrong thing, it's on the internet forever. You'll be labeled as a homophobe
that,
for the rest of your life, right? This guy's
right.
homophobic and he's not supportive of gay marriage, right? I mean,
So this goes
like
back.
that kills conversation and free speech, right? How am I supposed to change my view then? Then you forever labeled me as a homophobe.
And so that goes back to the original question that I asked. Like, what does it take for somebody to be comfortable on their own perspective? I think, at least for me, my experience, at least folks that I've seen that, are very outspoken and very, support a particular position, and they absolutely have to have it that way. They're typically, a little older, potentially more established in their careers, or they already have some life experience, and they're confident that they have a good foundation to be on from people in the Senate, congressmen, and government officials, typically older. But for me, I'm thinking it's once, thinking about those folks who have asked for their podcast be taken down, or the fear, right, is because they're younger, established yet. They don't have, they don't have their foundation built yet, right? So I don't want to jeopardize anything that has to do with that foundation.
Yeah,
This is just
right.
me. But it's like, once I have my foundation, and I have, my job, my family, I have my group of friends, that all think like me, then I don't feel so bad, with coming out and
say my opinion. That's my identity.
No, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
There's that.
and that's a good word. That's a good word. Yeah. So, right. So, they're still establishing their identity. And so it's like they don't want to be labeled as something that they haven't truly figured out that they either are or aren't. So that's a good word to remember. Identity. I like that.
I agree with that. The problem is, like, then internet culture, or like anything virtual, it actually solidifies your identity more than anything. Like, this is supposed to be like a more fluid place. I mean, now that your records are online forever, people can always throw dirt at you and point to something. Your sins never get erased away then, At least you're forgiven by God, I guess the internet doesn't forgive you. Your sins are always there, There's no blood of Christ or anything.
Right.
No forgiveness. It doesn't give you an opportunity to grow. You did something reprehensible, or you said something you regret, or you change your views on. Now, there are some things you say, it's like, why would you ever say that? Like,
Right.
let me think, like Kanye, like, I like
Sure.
Hitler, like, why would you go out and say that? You can
Right.
change again, but then it's like, I mean, maybe he's mentally not okay, but like, there's still some things
But
you shouldn't say.
about the difference between somebody who's genuinely changed their position,
Right.
over time, adapted, versus, I've just heard, through the news cycle about Liz Truss, right, who almost like overnight would change her position just to benefit herself. Eventually rose to prime minister. Kept vacillating between, whether to spend, deficit spending and or not to, and end up crashing the finances of the Commonwealth. So, she ended up leaving. So it's like, how much change is too much, right? What I think comes, what's not, and whether it's self-serving or not, right?
Right. I don't know if you think of this as me, but I don't like conflict with people, honestly. I don't go out of my way to try to hate people, or to try to oppress people, or try to put people down.
Mm-hmm.
But my views are my views, right? You can change my views by talking to me, really. I think I'm one of the people who are easier to have their views changed, right? Because I want to be agreeable. I want to be on the same page with people. I don't like differences in the sense that, I mean, I know that people are different, but I don't want the differences to become dividing factors between us, right? Because I think there's already
Right.
enough dividing factors in our world today. But based on what I said today, will people say that, like, I can't be friends with this person, or this person's, we got to cancel his podcast, things like that. I think, especially since I'm young too, like you said, still forming identity wise, like, it's easy to cancel me right now because I don't have anything,
Well,
right?
and here's the thing. I mean, Tommy Lahren, right? She's young. She came out with a very, firebrand type culture. She found some followers. She built her identity around it. Not to say she did the same thing. Matter of fact, I might not recommend that, but it's like, I would also ask, like, if you're honest with yourself, right, and you're honest about the podcast, I think that, it's a good forum. It provides maybe a unique outlet for other folks to understand what is the unfiltered position of young people today, right?
And that's what I was hoping to do with the podcast too.
Yeah,
Of course, it's the people who are
yeah,
speaking are at risk. You're going to be a target. I might be a target, but I feel that there's just too much, like, things that are left unsaid in our world today, where people can't be genuine to each other anymore. because they need to
Mhm.
hold a view that society believes is true or is not controversial, so you don't have people, so everyone likes you. But then we lose genuineness because of it, and that's one of the things I
Right.
wanted to change with the podcast. Yeah.
Well, here's a quote from David Lee Roth. Um, he said something about, so David Lee Roth, he was the lead singer of Van Halen back in the 1970s. He was a pretty wild guy. I don't know if it applies here, but essentially he said the first hate mail that he received, essentially then he knew he was a star. So, so when you start getting those letters,
Yeah, or
like
those
we hate
comments.
you, and
Yeah.
then you know.
Then you know you made it. I guess I'm not a star yet. Yeah, haven't gotten the hate mail yet. But then it's also good not to get too much hate mail, you know? You get a nice letter once in a while, that does make your day. Now, if you're getting all hate mail, then I think that doesn't make you a star, though. Right? I think he meant like once you get your first hate mail out of like a lot of good mail, that's good. If you're getting all hate mail, you're probably not going down the right path. Well, Andrew, that's all I had. Do you have anything else you want to mention?
No, I think I'm pretty good. I know we went a little bit long, but great discussion for sure.
Yeah, I hope to continue on. Yeah, thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening, everyone.